I don't know about you, but I think that's a pretty great testimony if we can say, all I have is Christ. Because that's all we need. He's everything that we need. And I'm so grateful that each and every week we can sing together about Him, we can rejoice in Him. And we're going to study God's Word together this morning in Mark chapter 2. We're going to continue in Mark chapter 2 this morning. Here we go again. I'm sure you've probably said that a time or two. You've probably thought it on many occasions. Maybe your team is winning, or you expect them to win, and then slowly things start to change, and you think, here we go again. Congrats to TCU for beating Baylor yesterday. Your parents are telling you to pick up your stuff, to finish your homework, to get off the video games. And you're thinking, here we go again. Or the holidays are coming up, and Grandpa's going to tell that same story that he's told 100 times before when you sit down for lunch and you're thinking, here we go again. Sometimes it feels like the same story in just a different day. And I'm pretty sure I could guess that Jesus felt the same way on many occasions throughout His earthly ministry. You see, when there's drama at work, anybody ever have drama at work? Drama at home. Don't answer out loud. Anybody have drama at home? Or dare I say drama from time to time in the church? It's often coming from the same usual suspects. Often the drama in our lives, the conflict in our lives, the frustrations and the struggles in our lives, though they can vary greatly, can consistently come from some of the same sources. And for Jesus, it was the Pharisees. These guys are the religious leaders. They're the law-loving, the hypercritical, the holier-than-thou types who are consistently criticizing, regularly trying to trap Jesus. Why? Because He's a threat to their system. He's doing it differently than they expect it to be done. He doesn't meet their strict expectations and follow all of their rules and their guidelines. And if you've been with us on this journey through Mark as we're ending chapter 2 and beginning chapter 3 today, you've already become accustomed to their opposition of Jesus. And it's only chapter 2. And for Jesus and for those of us who are reading and studying God's Word together, it's kind of that scenario of, here we go again. More conflict. Conflict after conflict after conflict. But you know, Jesus handles it well. Jesus handles it better than most of us would, and He's always prepared, it seems, for the conflicts that arise. And what He often does, and we're going to see what He does again here today, often He gets asked a question, which is often a trap or a criticism, and when He gets asked a question, instead of directly answering their question or their criticism, He responds with a question. It gets frustrating, doesn't it? You ask somebody a question and you want an answer from them, and their response is a question back to you, putting the heat back on you. I mean, sometimes it's just kind of fun to answer questions with questions and then just never give them. My kids, kids are asking us questions all the time. Well, I just ask them a question back. And then they ask another question. I just ask them another question back. It frustrates them because they just want me to answer the question. Jesus is good at frustrating his critics. But what Jesus does in this is He's trying to give them ownership. He's trying to really make them think carefully about why they're asking what they're asking. And do they really believe what they believe? Because you see, nothing's going to deter Jesus from fulfilling His purpose. He's focused, He stays on task, and He's consistent in His character. You see, circumstances don't deter Him. Criticism doesn't slow Him down. And conflict for Jesus is an opportunity to clarify his truth that he's trying to convey to the people. So when you choose to follow Jesus, when you choose to surrender your life to Christ, know that you're following the one who is capable in every way, who is consistent with his impeccable character, and who never gets distracted from fulfilling his purpose. So there's two bouts of conflict that Mark deals with and tells us about at the end of chapter 2 and beginning of chapter 3. So we pick up in Mark 2:23. The scripture says, on the Sabbath, he was going through the grain fields, and his disciples began to make their way, picking some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, look, why are they doing what's not lawful on the Sabbath? And he said to them, have you ever read what David and those who were with him did when he was in need and hungry? How he entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar the high priest and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for anyone to eat except the priests, and also gave some to his companions. And then he told them, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. So then, the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. So here we go again. The Pharisees are trying to make a case against Jesus. They're trying to make a case against his disciples, saying that they're breaking the rules, saying that they need to be punished. And Jesus is clear. As we saw last week, he didn't come to bring the burden of religion, the burden of rules. But instead, Jesus came to bring the blessing of a relationship with God. And what Jesus does here is he exposes the legalism of the Pharisees. They were adding to God's commands. They were taking God's commands and scriptures and they were adding to them because they just weren't quite strict enough. They weren't efficient enough to fulfill their purpose and to meet their expectation. And they were elevating their commands and their expectations to the level of God's commands and holding them as if they were the same as what God had commanded for the people to do. They had their traditions, they had their preferences, they tried to enforce them on others with a feeling of spiritual superiority. You see, legalism is commending self while condemning others. A legalistic mindset is commending yourself for doing right and meeting the expectations that you've set for yourself, but yet condemning others for not meeting your standard. It elevates feelings of superiority and elitism based on human work. It's so much more concerned about activity and behavior and checking all the boxes than it is the condition of one's heart. Have you ever heard anybody say that, wow, it's as cold as a legalist's heart? Maybe not. No, I have. But that's kind of a true depiction. Because it seems as though their hearts are so cold. Because it's all about the rules and it's all about their way. And the Pharisees were pros at making issues out of non-issues. They would twist and misconstrue a situation to make it look the way they wanted it to look, to make it feel the way they wanted it to feel, so they could control the narrative, so they could control the conversation. And the issue that they're bringing up wasn't really the issue. At the heart of it, they were the ones who were the issue. The problem they were bringing up wasn't really the problem. The problem was themselves. And so if you're constantly making an issue out of a non-issue, then you're the issue. If you're constantly making up problems that aren't really problems, then you're the problem. The government today is good at that. The media today is excellent at that. They take what should be non-issues and they make an issue about it so that they can control the narrative, so that they can affirm who they want to affirm and they can attack who they want to attack. And the problem with it is it's contagious. It's contagious. And the more people who catch on, the more who are going to stray further and further away from what God intended with His commands. You see, God's commands are good. God's rules that He established for us are good and meaningful and helpful. God's commands are there to help us, not to harm us, not to trip us up. And what happens is when we seek to follow God's commands and live by God's commands, we very quickly see that we're incapable of doing a good job of keeping up and following all of God's commands. In fact, we see over time that there's really very few ways that we can truly maintain a life of strict obedience to the commands and the laws and the rules and the expectations that God sets forth for us in Scripture. And this is why Jesus was sent by God. This is why God sent Jesus, to make a way for a relationship with God through His grace, not by works, not by rules, but by grace. You see, Jesus lived and Jesus died and Jesus rose again so that we could be free from the law and that we could live under His grace. You see, even when we choose to follow Jesus, when we choose to surrender our lives to Jesus, instead of surrendering to this vicious cycle of attempting to please God on our own, we still need to live in obedience to Him. We still need to follow His commands. Why? Because they exist for our benefit. They exist so that we have guidelines, so that we have directions to help us grow spiritually, to help us live a life that's pleasing and honorable to God. And God's commands are good. And what's happening here is Jesus is not breaking God's commands. He's not ignoring God's commands. He's not saying God's commands are irrelevant or that they're unnecessary or that they're bad. He's giving a healthy perspective on how to honor God, to honor Him in obedience, all the while not succumbing to the scrutiny of the man-made laws and the unfair expectations that we often place on one another. You see, the accusation here is that Jesus' disciples are breaking the Sabbath by picking grain. Sabbath is a holy day, a day set aside for worship, a day set aside for rest. God set apart one day a week for His people to worship and to rest. And the Jews were to abstain from every kind of work on the Sabbath because Jesus rested on the seventh day in creation. It was special. It was meaningful to them. And you can read in the Old Testament all the rules and laws and regulations. And you're not supposed to travel on the Sabbath. I mean, you can walk around and move around some, but like you're limited on the number of steps. I mean, some of you track your steps right on your smartwatch, on your Fitbit. Oh, I got to get my steps in today. Probably standing there at the desk like, I've been sitting all day. I got to go home, and I'm competing with my wife for how many steps I get in today, and so you're doing that or that kind of. You got to get your steps in. Too many steps on the Sabbath would violate the Sabbath because you're traveling too far. You're going too far. I mean, there's rules, there's regulations, and many of them are strict. You can. You're not really supposed to work of any kind. Another thing, they're picking some grain, and the Pharisees interpreted that as harvesting. Now they weren't using a sickle and bagging it all up. They were just gleaning a snack here or there. They needed something to eat. You see, in Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 through 11, it says, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. You're to labor 6 days and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You must not do any work. You, your son, your daughter, your male or female servant, your livestock, or the resident alien who is within your city gates. For the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and everything in them in 6 days. And then He rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and declared it holy." And the Pharisees took this and they ran with it, adding to the Sabbath a host of rules and regulations and restrictive guidelines to follow, none of which came from God. And this is exactly the opposite of what God intended for the Sabbath. You see, God gave us the Sabbath as a gift. Rest is meant to be a gift. Rest is meant to benefit us. Rest is meant to strengthen us. Worship is meant to benefit us. Worship is meant to strengthen us as we prepare to go back into the world and doing everything that we're expected to do all throughout the week. And any interpretation of the Sabbath that makes the day burdensome has surely missed the point. The Sabbath should be a blessing, not a burden. And so Jesus responds with a question. And he reminds them of the story of David eating the consecrated bread that was only for the priest. And if God allowed David to go beyond the strict regulations in a desperate situation, running for their life and hungry, then it's okay to prioritize man's needs on the Sabbath. And Jesus shows us here that human needs are a higher priority than some ceremonial law. Human needs are important to Jesus. Jesus' priority has always been and always will be his people. He came for the people. He came for relationship. He came to make things right and give us a way to have a meaningful relationship with God. That's a blessing and not a burden. And Jesus basically says, hey, lighten up. Lighten up. Verse 27, then he told them the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. So then the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. So by declaring himself the Son of Man over the Sabbath, he's clarifying to the Pharisees and to everybody else who's there, hey, guess what? You're not the one in charge here. I am. You're trying to make the rules about the Sabbath. I'm the Son of Man. I'm Lord over the Sabbath. And the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. The purpose of Sabbath is so that we have a day where we're not expected to walk a tightrope and follow all these restrictions so that we can please God. It's a day to relax, a day to rest, and a day to be refreshed for the week ahead. Paul in Colossians chapter 2, verses 16 and 17 says, therefore, don't let anyone judge you in regard to food and drink or in the matter of a festival or a new moon or a Sabbath day. These are a shadow of what was to come. The substance is Christ. What matters is Jesus. Don't get distracted. The substance is Jesus. What's most important is Jesus. Enjoy the Sabbath for what it is. Pay attention to who Jesus is and what he's about instead of trying to follow all the petty expectations of man. And so Jesus deals with that conflict, and then the conflict continues here on the same day. Chapter 3, verse 1, Jesus entered the synagogue again, and a man was there who had a shriveled hand. In order to accuse him, they were watching him closely to see whether he would heal him on the Sabbath. He told the man with the shriveled hand, stand before us. And then he said to them, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath or to do evil? To save life or to kill? But they were silent. You know, I want to be like Jesus in many ways, but I must confess this one's pretty high on my list. I wish I could be like Jesus and just leaving the critics silent. Just silence them. They didn't know what to say. They didn't know what to do. They didn't have a response. They didn't have an answer for Jesus. And then he said to them, after looking around with anger, he was grieved, the hardness of their heart, and told the man, stretch out your hand. So he stretched it out, and his hand was restored. Immediately, the Pharisees went out and started plotting with the Herodians against him and how they might kill him. Again, Jesus does something good for the sake of humanity, and his critics are outraged. But notice that they didn't just stumble across Jesus and just so happened to catch him in the act or doing something wrong. Verse 2 says, in order to accuse him, they were watching him closely to see whether he would heal him on the Sabbath. We're going to catch him. We're going to trap him. We're just waiting for him to mess up so we can expose him. Continuously monitoring Jesus because they wanted to find something wrong. Jesus healed a man, and what should have been celebrated was chastised, was criticized. We can see right through these Pharisees, and Jesus did too. His anger towards them was righteous, was justified. And his sadness towards their hardened hearts brought him grief. You see, it's okay to be angry towards evil. It's okay to be angry towards sin. And it's most definitely good to be grieved when we see the hearts of others hardened towards Jesus. Jesus is God's greatest gift to the world. There is no one, there is nothing better than Jesus. And he's right there. He's in their midst. He's displaying God's authority. He's displaying the compassion of God. And all they can do is criticize him. Why? Because they were focused on the rules and they missed the reality of Jesus. The Pharisees missed Jesus because they were being guided by their strict rules rather than the sovereign ruler. They missed Jesus. He was right there, displaying authority, extending compassion, showing mercy on humanity. And the Pharisees missed him. The Pharisees just didn't get it. And if you're not careful, you can easily miss Jesus. You can come to church. You can participate in all the activities. You can give your money, as I referenced earlier. You can serve with your time, etc., etc., etc. But the rules, the expectations, the self-sufficiency can cause you to overlook the reality of who Jesus is. Don't miss Jesus. Don't miss Jesus. See his mercy. Experience his grace. In this encounter, Jesus didn't break the rules. He spoke healing, which didn't violate the laws of Sabbath. Instead, he was reshaping the perspective on the Sabbath rule. Can you imagine Jesus saying to the man with the shriveled hand, hey, I see you can need some help, but I'm not going to help you today because it's the Sabbath. Maybe if I see you tomorrow, I'll help you. You know, I'm headed home from church today, and I see one of you kind people on the side of the road, and you've run out of gas or your car's broke down, and I stop to check on you, and you need some help. You say, you know what? I would love to help you, but it's the Sabbath. That would be considered work. I'm just going to go on home. If you're still here tomorrow when I come back by, I'll help you then. Absolutely ridiculous. I hope you do the same for me, by the way. The man needed mercy, and Jesus extended it to him. Let's go back to Hosea chapter 6, verse 6. For I desire faithful love and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. We can go to a familiar passage that many of you know well, Micah chapter 6 in the Old Testament. Verse 8, mankind, he has told each of you what's good and what it is the Lord requires of you. To act justly, to love faithfulness, and to walk humbly with your God. Remember what God requires of us. It's not rigid legalism. It's a relationship based on love. And these types of relationships, and this type of relationship that we have through Jesus Christ to God the Father, is a relationship that should lead us to showing mercy, extending kindness, and to helping one another. But that's not what the Pharisees saw. All they saw was a man who was threatening and challenging their way of life. And in verse 6, it says, immediately they went out and started plotting with the Herodians against him, how they might kill him. Just when you think it couldn't get any more ridiculous, they go and team up with a group of people that doesn't even like them, that's opposed to them. Because the Herodians were a political party that were loyal to Herod. They didn't like the Pharisees. They didn't support the Pharisees. They, in some ways, were enemies of the Pharisees. But the Herodians despised Jesus so much. The Pharisees despised Jesus so much. The two of them despise each other, but somehow, some way, they decided to get in cahoots with one another and join forces just so they could try to rally against Jesus. I mean, the Hatfields and the McCoys are coming together and working together. I mean, can you imagine like Republicans and Democrats like really coming together and working together on something? You would know that something crazy is happening. You know something really bad's had to happen for that to go. And in their minds, this was so bad that they had to come together and begin their plot of how they're going to kill Jesus. But if they could have seen Jesus for who he really is, then it would have changed their lives. It would have changed their purpose. It would have changed their perspective. But instead, they just wanted to fight for control. And so I tell you this morning, see Jesus for who he really is. Live with joyful obedience and let Jesus be your guide. The Sabbath is a blessing for believers. Treasure it, soak it up, rest, refresh, help others if needed. Worship on the Sabbath. Celebrate the resurrected Jesus. But spend more time pursuing Jesus than you pursue anything else. And as you follow Jesus, be like Jesus and make room for mercy.